When my husband told me, "I'm moving back in with my ex-wife to take care of her, you'll understand one day," I smiled and said, "Of course." I even packed his bags and drove him there. What I quietly slipped into her mailbox had him back home empty-handed in less than 48 hours. "I'm moving back in with Cassidy to take care of her during her recovery. You'll understand one day." Gabriel delivered these words while I was mid-sip of my Tuesday evening chamomile tea, causing me to set the cup down with deliberate control rather than throw it at his head. 5 years of marriage, and he chose to detonate our life together with the casual tone someone might use to announce they were switching grocery stores. I studied his face, the way he kept adjusting his reading glasses, the nervous twist of his wedding ring, the careful distance he maintained from me across our kitchen island. "Of course," I heard myself say, my voice carrying a sweetness that made him step back. "When do you need to leave?" His relief was instant and insulting. He'd expected tears, accusations, maybe even the ceramic mug flying past his ear. Instead, my calm acceptance threw him completely off balance. "Tomorrow afternoon," he managed, his fingers still worrying at that wedding ring. "Her surgery is Thursday morning at 7. Before we dive deeper, if you believe that trust and honesty are the foundation of any marriage, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share these important stories. Now let's see how Isabella handles this shocking betrayal. I nodded, taking another sip of tea. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in despite the open floor plan we'd fallen in love with when we bought the house 3 years ago. Back then, Gabriel had wrapped his arms around me in this very spot, whispering about the children we'd raise here, the dinner parties we'd host, the life we'd build together. Now he stood on the opposite side of the granite island like it was a fortress wall. "How long has Cassidy been planning this surgery?" I asked, my tone conversational. "About 2 months. It's complicated. Something to do with nerve damage from her car accident last year." He was warming to his topic now, probably grateful I was engaging rather than exploding. "She's been trying to manage with physical therapy, but the doctors finally said surgery was the only option." 2 months. While I'd been planning our anniversary trip to Napa Valley, he'd been planning his exodus. The reservation confirmations were still in my email, the wine tour already paid for, scheduled for 3 weeks from now. I wondered if he'd forgotten or simply hadn't cared enough to remember. "And she has no one else?" I asked, genuinely curious about this part of his narrative. Cassidy Morrison wasn't exactly a hermit. Her Facebook profile, which I definitely hadn't been checking, showed regular girls' nights, family barbecues, and a particularly close relationship with her sister despite what Gabriel was about to claim. Her parents moved to Florida last year, and you know she and her sister don't speak anymore. There it was, the lie sliding out smooth as butter. Just last week, Cassidy had posted photos from her sister's birthday dinner. "I'm the only one she feels comfortable asking for help with intimate care needs." Intimate care needs. The phrase hung in the air between us like a confession. I could see him realize what he'd said, watch the flush creep up his neck as he scrambled to clarify. Medical care. Medical care. Helping her shower, changing bandages, that sort of thing. "How fortunate that you're available to help," I said, getting up to rinse my mug in the sink. Through the window, I could see our neighbor Margaret walking her ancient poodle, keeping to her strict 7:30 schedule. The normalcy of it felt surreal. "Will you be staying in the guest room?" Gabriel's silence lasted a beat too long. "She's converted her home office into a recovery room. On the ground floor so she won't have to manage stairs." "That's thoughtful of her." I turned off the tap, dried my hands on the dish towel with deliberate care. "Planning ahead like that. 2 months, you said?" He must have heard something in my tone because his shoulders tensed. "Isabella, this isn't. I'm not leaving you. This is temporary. Just until she's back on her feet." "Of course it is." I folded the dish towel, hung it perfectly straight on the oven handle. "And how long do the doctors expect her recovery to take?" 6 weeks. Maybe 8, depending on complications. 8 weeks of my husband living with his ex-wife, providing intimate care, being her hero. I turned to face him fully, leaning back against the counter. "You've really thought this through." I had to. I knew it would be difficult for you to understand, but Isabella, she was my wife for 8 years. We might not have worked out, but I can't just abandon her when she needs help. There was that word again, abandon. As if not moving in with your ex-wife constituted abandonment. as if staying with your current wife was somehow the lesser moral choice. You're right, I said, and his eyes widened with surprise. I do understand. You've made a commitment and you need to honor it. Gabriel's relief was almost comical. He actually smiled, that boyish grin that had charmed me at a coffee shop 6 years ago. I knew you'd come around. You're amazing, Isabella. Not many women would be so understanding. I smiled back, already mentally cataloging the contents of his office. The passwords he kept on sticky notes despite my warnings about security. The filing cabinet where he thought I didn't know he kept old photos of Cassidy. Well, we should get you packed then. You'll want to be organized when you arrive. You don't have to help, he said quickly. I know this is strange. Nonsense. What kind of wife would I be if I didn't help my husband when he needs it? I moved past him toward the hallway. I'll get your suitcase from the closet. You should probably call Cassidy and let her know when to expect you. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I heard him behind me, his voice already dropping into those soft, intimate tones. Hey Cass. As I talked to her. She's being incredible about it. Incredible. That was one word for what I was being. Walking into our bedroom, I pulled his large suitcase from the closet, the one we'd bought for our honeymoon in Costa Rica. Inside, the luggage tag from that trip was still attached. Mr. and Mrs. Gabriel Harrington, it read. Forever begins today. Forever had lasted exactly 5 years, 2 months and 16 days. The suitcase lay open on our bed like a mouth waiting to swallow the last 5 years of my life. I heard the shower turn on in the master bathroom, Gabriel's off-key humming of some old song drifting through the door. He always hummed when he felt guilty, a tell he never knew he had. I folded another shirt, crisp hospital corners like my mother taught me, and placed it in the suitcase next to the others. His laptop sat open on his nightstand, the screen dark but not locked. Gabriel never remembered to lock it, despite my constant reminders about digital security. The shower was still running strong. He took long showers, especially when he needed to think, which meant I had at least 10 minutes. I walked around the bed and touched the trackpad. The screen blazed to life, revealing his email inbox. There at the top, a thread with Cassidy Morrison that stretched back 2 months. 2 months of planning this moment while I slept beside him each night, oblivious. The subject line read post-surgery arrangements, innocent enough for anyone glancing over his shoulder. I clicked it open. The latest message from Cassidy, sent yesterday at 11:43 p.m. while I was asleep after yoga, made my stomach twist. Can't wait to have you here again, Gabe. Feels like we're finally getting our second chance. Once you're moved in, we can see where this really goes. Gabriel's response, sent at 11:51 p.m. from the bathroom while I slept in the next room. Isabella won't fight it if we frame it right. She's too polite to seem unsupportive of someone who's sick. Trust me on this. Too polite. After 5 years of marriage, that was how he saw me. Not kind, not understanding, not loving. Polite. Like I was a stranger who'd hold the door open rather than let it slam in someone's face. I scrolled further back. March 15th, Cassidy wrote, "The doctor says I can schedule the surgery anytime after May. Should we wait until after your anniversary?" Gabriel's reply, "No, sooner is better. Isabella always gets emotional around our anniversary. Better to do it when she's distracted with work." They'd scheduled my heartbreak around my busy season at the marketing firm, like a dental appointment squeezed between meetings. I heard the water pressure change in the shower, signaling Gabriel was almost done. I closed the email, making sure to mark it as unread, and returned to folding clothes. When Gabriel emerged, towel around his waist, hair dripping, he found me organizing his medication bottles into a travel case. "You don't have to do this," he said, but his voice carried relief rather than protest. "Scrambled eggs or omelet?" I asked, not looking up from the pills I was sorting. "For breakfast, I mean. You'll need a good meal before the drive." "Isabella." He sat on the edge of the bed, water droplets from his hair hitting the comforter. "Scrambled it is. With that hot sauce you like." I snapped the medication case closed. "I'll start cooking while you get dressed." In the kitchen, I moved with practiced efficiency. Eggs whisked with a splash of cream, just how Gabriel preferred them. Sourdough bread in the toaster, butter softening on the counter. Coffee brewing strong and black. Every motion automatic, leaving my mind free to process what I'd read. 2 months. 8 weeks of careful planning, of synchronized deception. I thought about all the times he'd worked late, the weekend conferences that now seemed suspiciously frequent, The way he'd been extra attentive lately, guilt disguised as affection. The doorbell rang as I was plating the eggs. Through the kitchen window, I saw Maria's red Honda in the driveway. My best friend since college had the timing of someone who sensed disaster like animals sense earthquakes. Just wanted to drop off that book, Maria announced when I opened the door, though we both knew she'd never mentioned any book. Her eyes took in my forced smile, the sounds of Gabriel moving around upstairs, the suitcase visible through the bedroom doorway. Isabella, what's happening? Gabriel's helping Cassidy through surgery recovery, I said, my voice bright as morning sunshine. Isn't that wonderful of him? Maria's face went through several expressions before settling on disbelief. She worked as a surgical nurse at the same hospital where Cassidy was having her procedure. The breast augmentation? The words landed in my kitchen like grenades, but I kept whisking eggs. She said it was nerve damage from a car accident. Isabella. Maria lowered her voice. I saw the surgery schedule. Cosmetic. Elective. She's been planning it for months. How thoughtful of her to schedule it so carefully, I said, adding salt to the eggs with a steady hand. Maria stared at me. We'd known each other for 12 years through bad boyfriends and worse decisions, through her divorce and my father's death. She knew my faces, all of them including this one, the calm before I burned everything down. Do you want me to stay? She asked quietly. No need. Gabriel needs a good breakfast before his mission of mercy. I poured the eggs into the heated pan, the sizzle filling the silence. After Maria left, pressing my hand tightly and whispering, "Call me," I served Gabriel his breakfast. He ate quickly, nervously, complimenting the eggs twice as if that might ease his guilt. I sipped my coffee and made appropriate sounds of agreement when he explained again how temporary this arrangement would be. I should check the joint account, he said suddenly, pulling out his phone. Make sure there's enough for groceries while I'm gone. I watched him scroll through our banking app, watched his face remain carefully neutral as he viewed the balance. He didn't mention the $30,000 that had disappeared over the past 2 years, the monthly transfers to an insurance company I'd never heard of, the large withdrawal labeled property consultation from just 6 weeks ago. He simply closed the app and continued eating. I'll handle the bills while you're gone, I offered, refilling his coffee cup. You're incredible, he said again, that word that was starting to sound more like an indictment than a compliment. I don't deserve you. Finally, something we could agree on. I smiled and began clearing the dishes, each movement deliberate and calm while inside. Pieces of my world rearranged themselves into a pattern I was only beginning to understand. The missing money, the secret planning, the surgery that wasn't what it seemed, threads of deception weaving together into something larger than just an affair. We should finish packing, I said, drying my hands on the kitchen towel. Cassidy will be waiting. Back upstairs, Gabriel had moved to his office to make phone calls, his voice a low murmur through the closed door. I stood in our bedroom surveying the chaos of packing that lay ahead. His clothes hung in the closet like witnesses to our unraveling marriage, each shirt and tie holding memories I needed to push aside. I pulled out his summer clothes first, the linen pants he'd worn on our trip to Charleston last month, the polo shirts from golf outings with clients. Each piece folded with the precision of someone who'd worked retail in college, creases sharp enough to cut. Gabriel emerged from his office an hour later to find me surrounded by perfectly organized piles. His dress shirts arranged by color gradient, casual wear sorted by function, each stack looking like a department store display. You're really going all out, he said, and I heard the discomfort creeping into his voice. If you're going to be caring for someone, you need to be organized, I replied, holding up a label maker I'd found in the closet. I'm labeling everything so you can find what you need quickly. Morning wear, evening casual, sleepwear. Each label printed with unnecessary precision, the kind of detail that suggested either obsessive care or barely contained rage. Isabella, this is... He stopped, watching me fold his boxers into perfect squares. You really don't need to do all this. I've already started on the meals too, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. I'm preparing 2 weeks' worth of frozen dinners. Cassidy shouldn't have to cook while recovering, and you were never much good in the kitchen. The insult slid in smoothly, wrapped in concern. I've got chicken soup, that pasta bake you love, and I'm working on a special healing tea blend with ginger and turmeric. Gabriel's face went through several expressions before settling on something close to fear. A tea blend. For Cassidy's recovery. Anti-inflammatory properties. I smiled brightly. I'll put it in a nice jar with instructions. She'll appreciate the gesture. He retreated to his office again and I heard him on the phone, voice lowered but urgent. No, she's being helpful. Too helpful. It's strange. Pause. I don't know what to think. While he was distracted, I slipped into his office. The filing cabinet in the corner had always been locked, Gabriel's private space for what he called important documents. What he didn't know was that I'd had a copy of the key made years ago after he'd lost his original and asked me to order a replacement. 2 keys arrived, I gave him one. The bottom drawer slid open silently. Behind tax returns from 3 years ago, behind old warranties and instruction manuals, my fingers found a folder that felt different. Newer. The papers inside were crisp, recently handled. I pulled it out carefully, listening for Gabriel's footsteps. The first document stopped my breathing for a moment. A life insurance policy on Cassidy Morrison, dated 2 years ago, valued at $500,000. Gabriel listed as sole beneficiary. The premium payments, I noted with cold clarity, matched those mysterious insurance company deductions from our joint account. He'd been paying for this with our money, planning something I couldn't quite grasp yet. But the second document made everything crystalline clear. A quitclaim deed signed 6 weeks ago, transferring partial ownership of Cassidy's townhouse to Gabriel. The same townhouse he was moving into today. The document cited consideration of future care and support as the reason for transfer. 6 weeks ago we'd been celebrating our anniversary at that overpriced French restaurant downtown, Gabriel holding my hand across the table talking about our future. My phone camera captured everything. Each page, each signature, each date. The insurance policy's payment history. The deed's notary stamp. The witness signature that looked suspiciously like Gabriel's colleague Roger's handwriting. 23 photos in total, each one evidence of a betrayal that went deeper than just an affair. I heard Gabriel's footsteps in the hall and quickly returned everything exactly as I'd found it. The folder went back behind the tax returns, the drawer locked, and I was examining his bookshelf when he opened the door. Finding something? His voice carried an edge of suspicion. That medical reference book you bought last year, I said, running my finger along the spines. Thought it might be helpful for understanding Cassidy's recovery needs. He relaxed visibly. It's in the garage, I think. But really, the doctor will provide all the information. Of course. I moved past him toward the door. I should check on the soup. Downstairs, I ladled the freshly made chicken soup into containers, each one labeled with heating instructions in my neatest handwriting. My phone buzzed. Mother calling, her timing impeccable as always. I answered with forced cheer. Hi, Mom. Isabella, something's wrong. I can feel it. 30 years of maternal instinct compressed into one phone call. Everything's fine. Actually, Gabriel's doing something really noble. I let admiration seep into my voice. His ex-wife Cassidy needs help after surgery and he's stepping up to care for her. Isn't that wonderful? The silence on the other end stretched for 3 seconds. He's what? Moving in temporarily to help with her recovery. It's what any decent person would do. I knew my mother would be on the phone with her book club within minutes, the news spreading through our social circle like wildfire. Gabriel's noble gesture would be discussed over wine and judgment before he even arrived at Cassidy's. Isabella Marie. My mother's voice dropped to her serious tone, the one she'd used when she caught me sneaking out in high school. What are you playing at? I'm supporting my husband's decision to help someone in need, I replied, adding another container of soup to the growing collection. Wouldn't you do the same for Dad? She made a sound that could have meant anything. You call me if you need me. Of course, Mom. Give Dad my love. I hung up and returned to the meal preparation. Lasagna assembled with layers as precise as my folded clothes. Vegetable curry portioned into individual servings. Everything Gabriel would need for 2 weeks of domestic comfort while playing house with another woman. The tea blend came together last. Chamomile for calm, ginger for inflammation, honey powder for sweetness, and just a touch of lavender for sleep. Nothing harmful, nothing that would hurt anyone. Just a gentle remedy packed in a glass jar with a hand-painted label, for healing and new beginnings. Gabriel found me arranging everything in a cooler with ice packs. This is too much, he said, but his protest sounded hollow. It's exactly enough, I corrected, closing the cooler with a decisive snap. There. All ready for tomorrow. Wednesday morning arrived with a mockery of sunshine streaming through our bedroom windows. Gabriel was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in his freshly pressed khakis and the blue button-down I'd ironed the night before. The same shirt he'd worn to his first dinner with my parents 4 years ago. Now he was wearing it to move in with another woman. Coffee? I asked, already knowing the answer. Gabriel needed his morning coffee like other people needed oxygen, 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in the ukulele mug his brother had given him. In the kitchen, I moved through the ritual of coffee making with mechanical precision while Gabriel loaded his bags by the front door. The cooler of prepared meals sat ready on the counter, the glass jar of healing tea nestled on top like a crown jewel of martyrdom. I heard him grunt slightly as he lifted his suitcase, the one packed with clothes I'd folded as if preparing a soldier for war. My car's still in the shop, Gabriel announced when I handed him his coffee, though we both knew I'd seen it parked at his office yesterday when I'd driven past. Would you mind driving me? The lie sat between us, obvious and insulting, but I smiled. Of course. We should probably take the cooler too. Everything's ready. During the 20-minute drive to Cassidy's townhouse, Gabriel transformed. With each mile away from our home, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing deepened, his fingers stopped drumming nervously on his knee. By the time we reached the highway, he was actually humming again, that same guilty tune from yesterday's shower. This is really modern of us, he said as we passed the exit for downtown. Most people wouldn't understand this kind of arrangement. We're not most people, I replied, keeping my eyes on the road while memorizing every detail of his relief. The way he kept checking his phone, probably text messages from Cassidy. The slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The wedding ring he'd moved to his right hand sometime this morning, thinking I wouldn't notice. Cassidy's townhouse development appeared like a mirage of mediocrity, endless rows of beige and gray facades with tiny patches of regulated grass. Her unit sat at the end of Rosewood Court, a name that suggested elegance the neighborhood couldn't deliver. I pulled into her driveway behind a BMW that definitely hadn't been there during her supposed financial struggles she'd posted about on Facebook last year. Before Gabriel could even unbuckle his seatbelt, the front door opened. Cassidy stood framed in the doorway like she'd been waiting at the window, watching for our arrival. She wore silk pajamas the color of champagne, her blonde hair perfectly curled, her face fully made up with the kind of careful application that takes an hour minimum. For someone recovering from surgery, she looked remarkably like someone heading to brunch at an upscale restaurant. Gabriel. Her voice carried across the small lawn with practiced weakness. I was getting worried. She moved toward us with careful steps, one hand pressed to her side in a gesture of pain that didn't quite match the smooth flow of her walk. Gabriel practically leaped from the car to meet her, his hands hovering near her elbows as if she might collapse at any moment. Careful, he murmured, and I watched Cassidy lean into him with calculated fragility. Isabella, Cassidy finally acknowledged me, her green eyes sweeping over me with the kind of assessment women give their rivals. You're such an angel for understanding. Not many wives would be so evolved. I retrieved the cooler from the back seat, my movements deliberately cheerful. We all do what we must. Gabriel tells me your recovery might be challenging. Oh, it's been awful, Cassidy sighed, though her breathing showed no signs of post-surgical difficulty. The pain is just unbearable at times. I can barely manage alone. As we moved inside, I catalogued everything. The wheelchair positioned prominently in the living room but showing no signs of use, its price tag hastily removed but leaving adhesive residue. Prescription bottles arranged on the coffee table like props, their labels facing outward for maximum visibility. Fresh flowers in every room, the kind of expensive arrangements that suggested visitors were expected. The surgery recovery setup was as staged as a furniture showroom. Let me help with the bags, I offered, following Gabriel back to the car while Cassidy posed herself decoratively on the couch. She seems to be managing well for someone post-surgical, I commented mildly, lifting his laptop bag. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Recovery affects everyone differently. Inside, Cassidy had moved to the kitchen, her hand finding Gabriel's arm with the practiced ease of long-time intimacy. I've missed having someone here, she said, her fingers trailing along his sleeve. The nights are the hardest. Well, now you have help, I said brightly, setting the cooler on her granite counter. I've prepared 2 weeks of meals. And this, I held up the glass jar, is a special healing blend tea. Ginger, turmeric, chamomile. Very soothing. Cassidy's smile tightened at the edges. How thoughtful. I should go, I announced after helping arrange Gabriel's things in what Cassidy called the guest room but had clearly been recently redecorated with new sheets and fresh paint. Let you two get settled. Gabriel walked me to the door, his relief at my departure palpable. I'll call you later, he said, the lie comfortable on his lips. Take all the time you need, I replied, loud enough for Cassidy to hear. I drove 2 blocks to a small coffee shop I'd noticed on the way in. The afternoon crowd hadn't arrived yet, giving me privacy in a corner booth with my laptop and the folder I'd hidden in my purse. Every photograph from yesterday transferred to a new email account, backed up to a cloud service, evidence preserved in triplicate. The manila envelope I'd purchased that morning came out next. Inside went printed copies of everything. The life insurance policy with payment records highlighted, the property deed with a sticky note reading interesting timing, property transfer 6 weeks before elective surgery, screenshots of their planning emails with Gabriel's cruel assessment of my politeness highlighted in yellow. But the masterpiece was Cassidy's own Instagram. 3 days before her supposed emergency surgery, she'd posted photos from a wine tasting in Napa. Her radiant smile and the glass of Cabernet in her hand didn't suggest someone preparing for urgent medical intervention. I printed those too, adding another note, remarkable recovery from that wine tasting. The final piece of my package was the handwritten note on cream-colored stationery I'd purchased specifically for this moment. My handwriting, deliberately altered to be unrecognizable, spelled out Cassidy's future with surgical precision. Cassidy, you should know Gabriel took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on you 2 years ago, paid from marital assets. Combined with the property transfer, this creates an interesting financial picture. Perhaps ask why a healthy woman needs a caretaker who profits from her death. Check with your attorney about property transfers made under medical duress. Coercion voids contracts. Best wishes for your recovery, a concerned observer. I sealed the envelope, wrote Cassidy's name across the front and left the coffee shop. The walk to her neighborhood took 15 minutes, enough time for the afternoon to fade into early evening. Dog walkers and joggers provided perfect cover as I strolled past manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. Cassidy stood at the end of her driveway, black metal with a red flag waiting to announce incoming mail. I slipped the envelope inside, feeling the satisfying weight of it settling among her regular correspondence, then continued walking as if I belonged there, just another resident enjoying the evening air. The drive home felt like floating. Every traffic light seemed to understand my mood, turning green at my approach. Back in my empty house, the silence greeted me like an old friend. No television murmuring from Gabriel's study, no sound of his typing, no clearing of his throat when he wanted attention but wouldn't ask for it directly. Just blessed quiet. I poured myself a glass of Malbec from the bottle Gabriel had been saving for a special occasion and stood in my kitchen, surveying the space he'd always criticized. Too cluttered, he'd say, too many gadgets we never used. But tonight I saw it differently. Every appliance had its place, every spice jar faced forward, the counters clear and clean. This was my space, organized exactly how I wanted it. The wine tasted better than it ever had when shared with Gabriel. I reorganized the pantry while sipping it, moving his protein bars to the highest shelf, bringing my herbal teas front and center. His breakfast cereals went to the back, my granola took prime position. Small acts of reclamation that felt like revolution. My phone sat on the counter, face up, volume high. Cassidy always checked her mail first thing in the morning. She'd posted about it once, calling it her morning ritual before coffee. 7:30 a.m. like clockwork, based on the timestamps of her complaint posts about bills and political flyers. In approximately 13 hours she would find my envelope. The thought made me smile into my wine glass. That night, I slept in the center of our king-sized bed, spreading out like a starfish, claiming every inch of space Gabriel had occupied. No snoring from his side, no restless turning, no alarm set for his unreasonably early workout routine he'd maintained for exactly 3 weeks before quitting. The sheets smelled only of my lavender fabric softener, his cologne already fading like a ghost giving up its haunt. Thursday morning arrived with birds singing outside my window. 6:30 a.m. I stretched luxuriously, taking my time with morning yoga in the living room where Gabriel always complained about my mat being in the way. Warrior pose felt particularly appropriate as I held it, breathing deeply, centering myself for whatever would come. Breakfast was simple. Greek yogurt with honey and walnuts, green tea in my favorite mug. The delicate one with painted roses Gabriel said looked like something from a grandmother's estate sale. I checked work emails, responded to a client about a marketing proposal, scheduled a meeting for next week. Normal activities that felt surreal given what was brewing 2 miles away in Cassidy's mailbox. 7:30 came and went. My phone remained silent. 7:45. 8 o'clock. Either Cassidy was sleeping in, breaking her routine, or she was processing what she'd found. I imagined her standing in her driveway, envelope in hand, reading and rereading the note. The dawning realization that Gabriel might not be the savior she'd orchestrated him to be. At 8:17 my phone buzzed. Not Gabriel but my sister Lauren, her timing uncanny as always. "You're not going to believe what I just heard," she said without preamble. Lauren lived for gossip the way other people lived for oxygen. "Good morning to you too," I replied, refilling my tea. "Cassidy Morrison has been bragging at book club for weeks about getting Gabriel back," Lauren continued, her voice pitched with the excitement of someone delivering breaking news. "Jennifer. You remember Jennifer, Cassidy's sister. She's been telling everyone how Cassidy planned the whole thing. The surgery timing, everything." I set my cup down carefully. "Jennifer's in your book club?" "Started last month. She's been dying to vent about Cassidy. Apparently, Cassidy researched when your busy season at work would be, planned the surgery for maximum impact. She even practiced her helpless act in the mirror, according to Jennifer. The confirmation of what I'd suspected should have hurt, but instead, it felt like validation. Every instinct I'd had was correct. "That's quite elaborate," I said mildly. "Isabella, she's been planning this for over a year. Jennifer said Cassidy hired a private investigator to track Gabriel's routines, learned about your marriage problems." "We didn't have marriage problems," I interrupted. Lauren paused. "You didn't?" "Not until yesterday." The silence stretched between us before Lauren spoke again, her voice softer. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish my tea and work on the Henderson account," I replied. "Speaking of which, I have a video call with my attorney in 20 minutes. "Your attorney?" "Isabella, you didn't waste any time." "Why would I?" "Gabriel made his choice. I'm simply responding accordingly." After Lauren hung up, I prepared for my video consultation with Catherine Brennan, the attorney Maria had recommended last year during her own divorce. Catherine's face appeared on my laptop screen at exactly 9 o'clock, her expression professional but warm. "Isabella, I've reviewed the documents you sent. This is quite a collection." I'd emailed her everything the night before. The insurance policy, the property deed, bank statements showing the missing $30,000, screenshots of the email planning between Gabriel and Cassidy. "Your husband's actions constitute marital asset fraud," Catherine continued, her fingers steepled as she spoke. "Using joint funds for the insurance policy, the property consultation, hiding assets. These give you significant leverage. The property transfer alone raises questions about undue influence and financial manipulation." "What does that mean practically?" I asked, taking notes on a legal pad. "It means Gabriel has violated his fiduciary duty to you as his spouse. The court takes a dim view of spouses who dissipate marital assets, especially when deception is involved. You're entitled to a full accounting and likely a larger share of the remaining assets as compensation. And if he tries to claim this is temporary, that he's coming back?" Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. "Abandonment is abandonment, regardless of his stated intentions." Catherine was explaining the specifics of asset division when my phone rang at exactly 11:47 a.m. Gabriel's name on the screen made my pulse quicken, though I kept my expression neutral for the video call. "I need to take this," I told Catherine. "It's him. Document everything," she advised before I clicked over. Gabriel's voice came through high and strained, nothing like the confident man who'd left my house yesterday morning. "Isabella, I need to come home." "No. Can you come get me?" I stood up from my desk, moving to the window where morning light streamed through the blinds. "What's happened? Is Cassidy all right?" "She's lost her mind. She's locked me out. My bags are on the lawn. She's threatening to call the police." His words tumbled over each other, panic making him sound decades younger than his 35 years. She found some documents. She thinks I'm trying to. It's insane. She thinks I'm after her money. The satisfaction that bloomed in my chest was dark and complete, though my voice remained steady. The police? Gabriel, what kind of documents would make her think that? I don't know. The edge of hysteria in his voice was new. In 5 years of marriage, I'd never heard him this rattled. Something about insurance and property. She's completely paranoid. The pain medication must be affecting her judgment. I grabbed my car keys, already moving toward the door. I'm on my way. Try to stay calm. Please hurry. The neighbors are staring. The drive to Cassidy's took 18 minutes, though I could have made it in 12. Each red light gave me time to compose my face into the appropriate expression of concern mixed with confusion. By the time I turned onto Rosewood Court, I'd achieved the perfect balance of supportive wife rushing to rescue her troubled husband. The scene that greeted me was better than anything I could have imagined. Gabriel sat on his suitcases at the end of Cassidy's driveway, his shoulders hunched, looking exactly like lost luggage no one wanted to claim. His perfectly pressed shirt from yesterday was wrinkled, his hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. 2 neighbors stood in their driveways, pretending to check their mail while obviously gawking at the drama. Through Cassidy's front window I could see her pacing, phone pressed to her ear, gesticulating wildly with her free hand. Even from the car, her agitation was visible in every movement. The silk pajamas from yesterday had been replaced with regular clothes, the invalid act apparently forgotten in her rage. I parked and approached Gabriel with measured steps, aware of our audience. "Oh, Gabriel," I said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "What on earth happened?" He stood quickly, nearly stumbling over his own bags. "She just went crazy. 1 minute she was fine, the next she was screaming about fraud and throwing my things outside." His eyes darted toward the window where Cassidy had stopped pacing to glare at us. "We need to leave. Now." I picked up one of his bags, noting how he flinched when Cassidy's front door opened slightly, then slammed shut again. "Of course. Let's get your things in the car." We loaded his possessions quickly, the same bags I'd helped him pack with such precision now thrown haphazardly into my trunk. Gabriel kept looking back at the house as if expecting Cassidy to storm out at any moment. His hands shook as he closed the trunk. "She was fine last night," he said as we pulled away, Cassidy's townhouse shrinking in the rearview mirror. "We had dinner, watched a movie. Everything was normal. Then this morning she got the mail and just exploded." I merged onto the main road, keeping my voice gentle. "The mail. She found something in her mailbox. Documents about insurance policies and property transfers. She accused me of trying to steal from her, of planning to hurt her for money." His voice cracked on the last words. "Isabella, I would never. You know I would never." "Of course not," I soothed, signaling for a turn. "It sounds like the pain medication is making her paranoid. Some people have terrible reactions to those drugs. She's probably not thinking clearly." Gabriel seized on this explanation with desperate relief. "That must be it. The medications. She was taking so many pills yesterday." He rubbed his face with both hands. "But she called me a con artist. Said I was after her money. Where would she even get such an idea?" "Who knows what goes through someone's mind when they're not well," I offered, maintaining steady speed through our neighborhood. "Maybe she'll calm down once the medications wear off. She won't take my calls." I tried explaining, but she just kept screaming about lawyers and fraud charges. He slumped in the passenger seat, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. This was supposed to be about helping her recover. How did it turn into this? I pulled into our driveway, the familiar sight of our house apparently startling Gabriel, as if he'd forgotten this was still technically his home. We sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. "Maybe she just needs time," I suggested. "Surgery can be traumatic. People aren't themselves afterward." Gabriel nodded eagerly, clinging to any rational explanation that didn't involve examining his own actions. "You're right. She needs time. Once she's thinking clearly, she'll realize this is all a misunderstanding." As we unloaded his bags, Mrs. Patterson appeared with her ancient cocker spaniel, Butterscotch, timing her walk perfectly to intersect with our arrival. Mrs. Patterson had lived on our street for 30 years and possessed an intelligence network that would make the CIA envious. "Isabella." "Gabriel," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone pretending surprise while delivering gossip. I heard there was quite the commotion at the Morrison place this morning. Gabriel stiffened beside me, but I touched his arm gently. Mrs. Patterson, how are you? How's Butterscotch? Oh, we're fine, dear. Though I must say the police scanner was very active this morning. Something about a domestic dispute on Rosewood Court. Her eyes glinted with barely contained excitement. The whole neighborhood heard the yelling. Something about fraud and theft. That poor woman was beside herself. Gabriel's face flushed deep red. It was a misunderstanding. Of course, Mrs. Patterson agreed, though her expression suggested she was already composing the story she'd share at tomorrow's neighborhood coffee clatch. These things happen. Though I must say accusations of fraud are quite serious. The police seemed very interested. We should get inside, I said to Mrs. Patterson, gesturing toward Gabriel's bags scattered on our driveway. It's been a long morning. She nodded knowingly, tugging Butterscotch's leash. Of course, dear. You two take care now. Her parting look at Gabriel suggested she'd already convicted him in the court of neighborhood opinion. Gabriel trudged behind me into the house, dragging his suitcase like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He headed straight for our bedroom, muscle memory guiding him up the stairs while I stayed in the kitchen, counting down the minutes until he discovered the changes I'd made. 3 minutes. That's how long it took before I heard his footsteps returning, heavier now, almost stumbling. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face pale. My clothes aren't in the closet. They're in the guest room, I said, pulling a folder from my laptop bag. We need to talk. Gabriel's eyes fixed on the folder in my hands, the legal-sized manila envelope that held his future. Isabella, what is this? Sit down, I said, gesturing to the kitchen table where we'd shared 5 years of meals, conversations, and lies. He sat slowly, like his bones had turned to glass. I opened the folder and spread the contents across the table with deliberate precision. The divorce papers, crisp and official with their blue backing. The forensic accounting report Catherine's team had prepared, 23 pages detailing every financial transgression. Bank statements with highlighted withdrawals. The insurance policy documentation. The property deed transfer. A comprehensive catalog of betrayal, documented in black and white. Gabriel's face transformed as he processed what lay before him. First came confusion, his eyebrows drawing together as he tried to make sense of the papers. Then shock, his mouth opening slightly as he recognized the insurance documents. Anger flashed next, his jaw clenching as he saw the bank statements. Finally, as the full scope of his exposure became clear, his expression crumbled into something pathetic and pleading. Where did you get these? His voice was barely a whisper. From your filing cabinet. The one you thought I didn't have a key to. I sat across from him, maintaining the same calm I'd shown since Tuesday night. The divorce papers are new, of course. My attorney drew them up this morning. Your attorney? He looked up sharply. You've already seen a lawyer? You moved in with another woman, Gabriel. What did you expect me to do? Wait patiently for you to come back? His hands trembled as he picked up the forensic accounting report. This says I diverted $30,000. $32,467 to be precise. Over 2 years. Insurance premiums for a policy on Cassidy. Property consultation fees that mysteriously coincided with her deed transfer. Various other expenses that had nothing to do with our marriage but everything to do with your plans with her. The house, he said suddenly, looking around our kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. This is our house. No, Gabriel. This is my house. Purchased before our marriage with my inheritance from my grandmother. You never contributed to the mortgage payments. That came from my personal account, not our joint finances. You're a tenant here now, and you have 30 days to find alternative accommodation. The color drained from his face entirely. You can't do this. I can and I am. The joint accounts have been frozen pending division of assets. Though given the forensic accounting, my attorney believes the court will be very interested in your financial misconduct. Marital asset fraud, she called it. Gabriel stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You planned this. You knew about Cassidy's surgery, about everything. I knew what you chose to show me, I said calmly. Your laptop was open. Your emails were right there. You left your filing cabinet unlocked. You made it remarkably easy to understand exactly what you and Cassidy were planning. The documents, he said, the realization dawning with horrible clarity. The ones Cassidy found in her mailbox. That was you. I tilted my head slightly. I simply ensured everyone involved had all the information needed to make informed decisions. Isn't that what you claim to be doing? Making the mature, informed choice to help someone in need. You destroyed everything, Gabriel said, his voice rising. You turned Cassidy against me. I didn't turn anyone against you. I just made sure Cassidy knew about the life insurance policy you took out on her. The one worth $500,000 with you as the sole beneficiary. Any reasonable person would find that concerning, don't you think? Especially combined with the property transfer. Gabriel's phone buzzed on the table. He grabbed it and I watched his face go even paler as he read. He turned the screen toward me. Cassidy's Facebook post was already gaining traction, posted just minutes ago. Warning to all women, it began in all caps. Gabriel Harrington is a fraud who tried to con me out of my house and took out life insurance on me without my knowledge. He used his wife's money to pay for it while planning to leave her. Receipts attached. Below were photos of every document from the envelope I'd left in her mailbox. The insurance policy, the property deed, even screenshots of their emails discussing their plan. The comments were already piling up, our mutual friends expressing shock, anger, disbelief. My reputation, Gabriel whispered, scrolling through the growing storm of comments. My career. Everyone will see this. Yes, I agreed. They will. His phone rang. His brother's name appeared on the screen. Then it rang again. His mother. A colleague. The avalanche had begun. You did this, he said, but there was no fight left in his voice, just hollow recognition. You orchestrated all of it. The packing, the driving me there, the documents. You knew exactly what would happen. I knew that Cassidy deserved to know what kind of man was moving into her house. I knew you deserved to face the consequences of your choices. And I knew I deserved better than a husband who'd been planning his exit for 2 years while sleeping beside me every night. Gabriel sank back into the chair, his phone continuing to buzz with incoming calls and messages. The life he'd carefully built, the reputation he'd cultivated, the elaborate plan he'd crafted with Cassidy, all of it was crumbling in real time, documented for public consumption on social media. The guest room has clean sheets, I said, gathering the legal documents back into their folder. Your belongings are in the closet there. You have 30 days, Gabriel. I suggest you start looking for an apartment tomorrow. I stood to leave, but his voice stopped me at the doorway. How long have you known? Known what? That you were leaving? Since Tuesday night. That you were a liar? Maybe I always knew. I just chose to believe in something better. I never meant for it to happen like this, he said to my back. No, I agreed without turning around. You meant for it to happen with me never finding out. With you having both Cassidy's property and my financial support. With you getting everything while I got nothing but an empty house and confusion. This version where you get exposed for who you really are. You're right. You never meant for that to happen. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, mine alone now, and closed the door on Gabriel's muffled phone conversation with what sounded like his brother. The panicked tone of his voice drifted through the floorboards as I changed into comfortable clothes and pulled my hair back. This was my house. My space. My life to reclaim. 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and redirected mail. The suburban gossip network, more efficient than any news service, kept me informed without my having to ask. Maria heard from her colleague who lived on Rosewood Court that Cassidy had filed a restraining order against Gabriel. The property transfer had been flagged as potentially fraudulent, and she was pursuing legal action. Mrs. Patterson, walking butterscotch past my house daily now, mentioned she'd heard Gabriel had moved into a studio apartment near the highway, the kind of place that advertised affordable weekly rates on faded billboards. My mother arrived on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after Gabriel's departure, carrying a pot of her famous chicken soup and wearing the determined expression of a woman on a mission. She let herself in with her spare key, found me reading in the living room, and set the soup on the kitchen counter without a word. You look thin, she said, her standard greeting regardless of my actual appearance. I'm eating fine, Mom. She heated the soup while I set the table, our movements synchronized from years of practice. We ate in comfortable silence for several minutes before she spoke again. Your father wasn't my first husband. I nearly dropped my spoon. In 32 years she'd never mentioned this. His name was Richard, she continued, stirring her soup with careful precision. Charming, ambitious, everything a young woman thinks she wants. We were married for 3 years before I discovered he'd been using my trust fund to finance his girlfriend's boutique. He'd convinced me to put his name on everything, said it was what married couples did. Mom, I had no idea. I was 25 and thought I knew everything about love. She looked up at me and I saw my own recent experience reflected in her eyes. The morning I found out, I wanted to burn his clothes on the lawn, scream at him in front of his colleagues, make sure everyone knew what kind of man he was. What did you do? I documented everything. Quietly. Carefully. Then I served him divorce papers at his girlfriend's boutique grand opening, in front of all their investors. A small smile played at her lips. The boutique closed within 6 months. Richard moved to Ohio and became a used car salesman. Last I heard, he was on his 3rd marriage. And Dad? I met your father 2 years later. By then I knew the difference between charm and character. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The best revenge is living well while they live with their choices, Isabella. You're already doing that. The validation I hadn't known I needed washed over me. My mother, the woman who'd taught me to fold fitted sheets and never leave the house without lipstick, understood exactly what I'd done and why. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, Cassidy's sister from Lauren's book club. Cassidy wants you to know something. Can I give her your number? I considered for a moment before responding. She can email me. The message came through that evening, sent from a new email address with no subject line. Isabella. I won't insult you with apologies or excuses. We both know what I did and what I intended to do. But you saved me from something potentially dangerous. The insurance policy, the property transfer. My lawyer says it could have been catastrophic if I'd let him stay. I've posted everything online, not for drama but to warn others. Gabriel Harrington is a predator in a pleasant mask. Thank you for removing that mask. I'm moving to Colorado next month. Fresh start. Cassidy. I read it twice before deleting it. No response was needed. Cassidy and I weren't going to become friends, bonded by Gabriel's betrayal. We were just 2 women who'd learned an expensive lesson about the difference between what men say and what they do. The leaves turned fall colors as my life settled into new rhythms. Gabriel's 30 days came and went with him, collecting his remaining belongings while I was deliberately at work. He left his key on the kitchen counter with no note, just the metal acknowledgement that this chapter was closed. 6 months after that Tuesday evening revelation, I hosted my first dinner party in the house that was now entirely mine. Maria brought her new boyfriend, a pediatrician who laughed at her jokes and looked at her like she hung the moon. Lauren came with her husband and a bottle of wine expensive enough to show she was celebrating my freedom. Even Mrs. Patterson was invited, regaling everyone with neighborhood gossip while pretending she hadn't been my spy network during the dark days. The house felt different now. Lighter. I'd repainted the walls in colors Gabriel had called too bold, hung artwork he deemed too modern, and converted his office into a reading room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Every corner reflected my choices, my taste, my life. A toast, Maria announced, raising her glass as we gathered in the living room after dinner. To Isabella, who showed us all that sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge, it's revelation. We clinked glasses, the sound crystalline in my peaceful home. Through the window, I could see the city lights spreading into the distance, each one representing someone living their own story, facing their own betrayals and triumphs. Somewhere across town, Gabriel was learning that reputation once shattered couldn't be rebuilt with explanations or excuses. His LinkedIn profile had gone dark after too many people shared Cassidy's warning post. The marketing firm where he'd worked had quietly suggested he seek opportunities elsewhere. Cassidy had indeed moved to Colorado, leaving behind a townhouse that no longer held either profit or promise for Gabriel's schemes. I stood in my kitchen after everyone left, washing wine glasses by hand, taking comfort in the simple ritual. The house was quiet but not empty. It was filled with the echoes of genuine laughter, real friendship, and the knowledge that I'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. The manila envelope that had started Gabriel's downfall was long gone, but its impact remained. Not in bitterness or anger, but in the clean, sharp clarity of a life reclaimed. I'd learned that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't rage or revenge. It's simply ensuring everyone sees the truth. If this story of calculated revenge kept you riveted until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Isabella slipped that manila envelope into Cassidy's mailbox, knowing exactly what would unfold within 48 hours. What was your favorite moment of Isabella's masterful planning? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. My husband told me, "Don't embarrass me. You're too plain for my wealthy colleagues. Stay in your lane." I agreed quietly. I smiled and said, "Sure." A week later, he nearly choked when I walked into his private club as the owner. His so-called friends bowed to the woman he once dismissed. "Don't embarrass me tonight. You're too plain for my wealthy colleagues. Stay in your lane." Clark delivered these words while adjusting his Hermes tie in our bedroom mirror, speaking as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. I stood behind him, holding the cocktail dress I'd been about to put on for the Meridian Club dinner, watching his reflection for any sign that he recognized the cruelty of what he'd just said. There was none. He simply continued knotting his tie, oblivious to the fact that his plain wife had personally approved every one of his colleagues' memberships to the very club where tonight's dinner would occur, that the building they worshipped as a temple of success bore my name on the deed. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that no one should be dismissed as too plain for success, please consider subscribing. It helps more women hear these powerful stories. I hung the dress back in the closet, my movements deliberate and calm. "Of course," I said. "I understand." He smiled then, that satisfied expression he wore when a negotiation went his way. "Good. These Korean clients expect a certain standard. Morrison's wife spent 2 hours at the salon today just for this dinner. Blackstone's wife flew to New York last week for a new outfit." He turned from the mirror to face me directly. "You have to understand, Audrey, that at this level appearance matters. First impressions are everything." 4 years of marriage and he still believed I didn't grasp basic social concepts. I wanted to tell him that I'd watched those same wives stumble through small talk at a dozen events, their salon hair and designer clothes unable to mask their desperate need for approval. Instead, I straightened his already perfect tie, playing the role he'd cast me in since our wedding day. "What time will you be home?" I asked. "Late. These dinners run long, especially when we're closing deals." He checked his Rolex, the one he'd bought to impress Morrison, not knowing that Morrison's own watch was a fake that I'd chosen to ignore when reviewing his membership application. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you get hungry." The leftover pasta from 3 nights ago, when he'd ordered Italian from the place that charged $40 for basic marinara because they delivered to Meridian Club members. He'd eaten barely half his portion, complaining the sauce was too acidic, while I finished my sandwich from the deli down the street. After he left, trailing cologne that cost more than our monthly utilities, I sat at our small dining table and opened my laptop. Not to check our bank balance or browse social media, but to review the quarterly reports for V. Monroe Holdings. The portfolio my grandmother had built from nothing, the empire she'd constructed while men like Clark dismissed her as furniture in their boardrooms. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Blackwood, the general manager at Meridian. "Mrs. Hartwell, tonight's dinner is proceeding as planned. Your husband's table is set for 12. Shall I maintain standard protocol?" Standard protocol meant treating me like a ghost when Clark was present, pretending the owner of the establishment didn't exist. I'd maintained this charade for 3 years, watching Clark preen in my building while telling people his wife worked in administration, with a dismissive wave that suggested I filed papers for a living. "Yes," I typed back. "For now." The apartment felt smaller after Clark left, or maybe it just felt more honest. Without his presence demanding space, requiring accommodation, needing constant validation that he was climbing the right ladder fast enough, I could breathe. I walked to our bedroom closet and pushed aside the row of Clark's suits, Armani, Hugo Boss, Tom Ford, to reach the back wall where I kept a single garment bag he'd never noticed. Inside hung a Saint Laurent dress my grandmother had bought in 1982, the year she made her first million. She'd worn it exactly once, to a shareholder meeting where she'd gained controlling interest in her first commercial property. "Save it," she told me during those final weeks in the hospital. "Wear it the day you stop hiding." I ran my fingers across the fabric, still perfect after all these years. Clark would call it plain, black, simple lines, no embellishments. He wouldn't understand that its power lay in its simplicity, that the woman wearing it didn't need decoration to command a room. My phone rang. Janet, my cousin, whose name appeared above a photo from better times, before her husband had turned their marriage into a transaction and she turned her pain into Xanax and wine. "I need to see you," she said without preamble. Robert's at it again. "I found receipts." "Come over," I said. "Clark's at a dinner." "At Meridian? Where else?" She laughed, but it was bitter. Must be nice being married to someone important enough for Meridian. I bit back the irony of her statement. Janet arrived 20 minutes later, her designer handbag worth more than our rent but her face showing the exhaustion that money couldn't fix. She collapsed onto our second-hand couch, the one Clark complained about whenever we had company, and started crying before she'd even taken off her coat. 23 years old, she said between sobs. His personal trainer. Can you believe it? I'm 42, Audrey. When did I become the disposable wife? I sat beside her, offering tissues and silence. There were no good words for this moment, no comfort that wouldn't sound hollow. Janet had married Robert for love, or what she'd thought was love, and discovered too late that he'd married her for her trust fund and connections. Clark doesn't even hide it anymore, Janet continued. Robert, I mean. He takes her to Meridian for lunch. Books the private dining room. The staff all know, they give me these pitying looks when I'm there. The staff at my club, witnessing the destruction of my cousin's marriage in my private dining room. I made a mental note to review Robert's membership status. There were standards to maintain, even if Clark didn't think I understood such concepts. What are you going to do? I asked. Leave him. Take what I can get in the divorce and start over. She looked around our apartment, taking in the shabby furniture, the cramped space, the absence of luxury. You're lucky, you know. Clark might not be rich, but at least he comes home to you. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of her statement. Clark came home to the idea of me, the convenient wife who kept his life organized while staying out of his real world. But Janet didn't need my problems tonight. She needed my couch, my silence, and my promise not to judge her for what came next. After she left, I stood at our bedroom window watching the city lights sparkle below. Somewhere out there, Clark was sitting in my club at my table, surrounded by people who owed their membership to my approval, telling them his wife was too plain for their company. The thought should have hurt, but instead, it crystallized something that had been forming since I'd found my grandmother's will. Being underestimated was a weapon, but only if you knew when to reveal your true power. Tonight wasn't that night. But soon, very soon, Clark would learn that the plain wife he'd dismissed owned the very kingdom he was so desperate to conquer. Monday morning arrived with Clark already gone to the office, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne and a note reminding me to pick up his suits from the dry cleaner. Mrs. Kim's shop sat 3 blocks from our apartment, wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a failing bookstore, the kind of neighborhood Clark called transitional when explaining why we lived there. Mrs. Kim looked up from her pressing machine as I entered, her face brightening with the particular smile she reserved for regular customers who actually talked to her. Mrs. Hartwell. I have Mr. Hartwell's suits ready. Such beautiful fabric. He must be very successful. He likes to look professional, I said, pulling out my wallet. She disappeared into the back, returning with 5 suits wrapped in plastic. As she rang them up, she tilted her head thoughtfully. I saw him last Tuesday at that fancy Meridian club. My nephew works valet there. Very exclusive place. Tuesday. Clark had called that morning about a client emergency, said he'd be in depositions all day. Kept my voice steady. Oh. He has lots of meetings there. Yes, with that elegant blonde woman. Such a lovely laugh. My nephew says you can hear it across the whole dining room. Very charming. Is she his sister? They seem very close. My fingers tightened on my credit card, but I managed a neutral expression. Must be someone from the firm. They often have team lunches. Mrs. Kim nodded, but something in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Every Tuesday, my nephew says. Same table by the window. Same woman. She must be very important client. I signed the receipt, my signature slightly shakier than usual. Clark works with many important people. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk holding $5,000 worth of suits while processing what Mrs. Kim had inadvertently revealed. Every Tuesday. The same woman. An elegant blonde with a memorable laugh. Clark had worked late every Tuesday for the past 2 months, always with excuses about difficult clients or urgent briefs. Back at the apartment, I hung his suits in our bedroom closet, each one in its designated spot because Clark insisted on organization. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Can I come by? Robert's at another conference, and I can't stand being alone." She arrived 30 minutes later with coffee and pastries from the expensive bakery Clark always said we couldn't afford. We sat at my small dining table and I watched her pick apart a croissant without eating any of it. "I need to use your bathroom," she said suddenly, getting up before I could respond. But instead of heading to the bathroom, I heard her footsteps in the hallway. "Audrey," she called, "where do you keep extra blankets? I'm freezing." "Hall closet, top shelf," I replied, not thinking about what else was stored there. The sound that followed wasn't quite a scream, more like a sharp intake of breath that seemed to go on forever. I found Janet sitting on the hallway floor, surrounded by papers she'd accidentally knocked down while reaching for blankets. Financial statements spread around her like fallen leaves. Property deeds. Investment portfolios. And there, right in front of her, the Meridian Club ownership documents with my name printed clearly across the top. "Audrey." Her voice came out strangled. "What is this?" I knelt beside her, gathering papers with steady hands. "Something Clark doesn't know about." "Doesn't know about? You own Meridian?" "The Meridian Club where Robert and Clark practically live. My grandmother left it to me. Among other things." Janet's eyes scanned the documents, her expression shifting from shock to something harder. $80 million. You have $80 million and Clark doesn't know. He never asked. He assumed I was what I appeared to be. But why? Why hide this? I sat back against the wall holding the papers against my chest. Grandma spent 40 years being invisible in boardrooms while men stole her ideas. She wanted to know if Clark loved me or the idea of what I could give him. And Tuesday lunches with an elegant blonde woman. Every week. Same table by the window. Janet's face darkened. "That piece of..." She stopped herself, then looked at me with new understanding. "You're planning something." "I'm waiting," I corrected. "There's a difference." She helped me return everything to its hiding place, then sat back at the dining table with a different energy. "You know what? We're both idiots. Hiding who we are, accepting whatever crumbs they throw us." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Clark's name appeared on the screen. "Great news," he said without greeting. "Morrison just called. I made senior partner. Youngest in the firm's history." "Congratulations," I began, but he was already continuing. "There's a celebration dinner tomorrow night at Meridian. Black tie, very exclusive. Morrison says it's partners only though. Wives will have their own event next month. Some kind of tea or something more appropriate to your interests." More appropriate to my interests. As if he had any idea what my interests were. "I understand," I said. "You're not upset? I know you were looking forward to the partners' dinner." I had never once expressed interest in his firm's dinners. He was projecting what he thought I should want, then dismissing it preemptively. "No, Clark. Enjoy your celebration. You're the best, Audrey. So understanding. Morrison's wife throws fits about these things, but you get it. You know your place." After he hung up, Janet stared at me. "You know your place?" He actually said that. He says a lot of things. That night, Clark practiced his acceptance speech in our bathroom mirror while I lay on our bed, listening through the thin door. He thanked Morrison for the mentorship, Blackstone for the partnership, the mysterious Tuesday woman he referred to as Charlotte from consulting for her invaluable support. Not one mention of the wife who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through law school, who'd typed his briefs when he broke his wrist, who'd attended every meaningless firm picnic and pretended his colleagues' stories were interesting. While he delivered his speech to his reflection, I retrieved my car keys and drove to the storage unit across town. Clark thought I couldn't afford a car, didn't know about the BMW registered to V. Monroe Holdings that I kept for moments when I needed to be myself. The storage unit held everything Clark had never bothered to ask about. My grandmother's furniture, too valuable for our apartment but too meaningful to sell. boxes of photographs from her years of building an empire in silence. And there, in a trunk that hadn't been opened since her funeral, her leather journal. I sat on the concrete floor and read by the fluorescent lights. Her handwriting, strong at first then gradually weakening, documented every slight, every stolen idea, every moment when men had taken credit for her brilliance. But alongside the indignities were the triumphs, carefully recorded in financial terms. The first profitable quarter. The first million. The first property. The acquisition of Meridian, bought from a man who'd laughed at her investment proposals 20 years earlier. The final entry, written a week before she died, made me close the journal and hold it against my chest. Audrey will understand the value of being underestimated. Let them think you're nobody until the moment you show them you're everything. I drove back from the storage unit with my grandmother's journal on the passenger seat, her words echoing in my mind as I navigated the empty streets at midnight. Clark was asleep when I returned, sprawled across our bed in his Harvard Law t-shirt, taking up 3/4 of the mattress as if even in sleep he needed to claim more than his share. The next morning arrived like any other, except this time I knew it would be different. I stood in the kitchen organizing the pantry, placing Clark's overpriced organic pasta in perfect rows because he insisted that visual organization promoted mental clarity. Behind me, I heard him enter the kitchen, his footsteps carrying that particular weight of someone about to deliver what they considered wisdom. He stopped at the microwave, using its black surface as a mirror to adjust his Hermes tie. The silence stretched between us as I continued arranging his gluten-free crackers, waiting for whatever complaint he'd prepared for today. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he said suddenly, his tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "You're too plain for my wealthy colleagues. Stay in your lane." The can of San Marzano tomatoes in my hand weighed exactly 14 ounces according to its label. I focused on that weight, on the way the metal felt against my palm, on anything except the urge to turn around and demonstrate exactly how much damage 14 ounces of canned tomatoes could inflict on a perfectly styled head of hair. From the living room, I heard Janet's coffee cup hit the saucer with a sharp clink. She'd heard everything through our paper-thin walls, the ones Clark constantly complained about but refused to leave because the address was respectable enough for his business cards. "Of course," I said, my voice steady as I placed the can on its designated shelf. "I understand." Clark made a satisfied sound, the kind he produced when a negotiation went his way. He grabbed his travel mug of precisely heated coffee and headed for the door, not bothering with a goodbye kiss or even a backward glance. The apartment door closed with its usual protest from the loose hinges he kept promising to fix. Janet appeared in the kitchen doorway before Clark's footsteps had faded from the hallway. Her face carried the kind of rage that made her look younger, more like the cousin who'd defended me from schoolyard bullies than the woman whose husband was destroying her with his affairs. "I'm going after him," she announced, already moving toward the door. "That pathetic excuse for a man needs to hear exactly what." I raised my hand and she stopped mid-step. No. Audrey, he just told you that you're too plain for his precious colleagues. I know what he said." I turned from the pantry to face her fully. "This is my battle, Janet. And it needs to be planned, not reactive." She stood there vibrating with fury on my behalf, and something in my expression must have communicated what I couldn't say aloud yet. Slowly, she walked to our second-hand couch, the one Clark deemed embarrassing whenever anyone visited, and collapsed into its worn cushions. "For years," she said, her voice quieter now but no less intense. 4 years of this and you just take it?" I sat beside her, feeling the familiar sag of cushions that had supported too many difficult conversations. "Tell me what you see, Janet." "All of it." She laughed, but it held no humor. "Where do I start? The birthday he forgot because Morrison needed a fourth for golf? The anniversary dinner he canceled 20 minutes before the reservation because Blackstone wanted to discuss strategy over drinks?" Her hands moved as she spoke, painting Clark's failures in the air between us. "The way he introduces you at events, when he actually brings you, 'This is Audrey, she does administrative work,' with that little wave like he's brushing away a fly." Each word landed with precision, confirming what I'd recorded in my mental ledger for years. "He doesn't even see you," Janet continued. "You're just functionality to him. Someone who keeps his life organized while he pursues what he thinks matters." "And what would hurt him most?" I asked. Janet's eyes sharpened. Public humiliation. Complete, undeniable, witnessed by everyone humiliation. Clark's entire identity is built on what others think of him. Take that away. She trailed off, understanding dawning on her face. You're going to destroy him at Meridian. I pulled out my phone and found the contact I'd saved under MB Emergency. Marcus Blackwood's private number, given to me by my grandmother with explicit instructions to use it when the time came. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment, then pressed down. The phone rang twice before a cultured British accent answered. Mrs. Hartwell. I wondered when you might call. Hello, Marcus. It's about time, if I may say so. 20 years I worked for your grandmother, and 3 years I've watched you tolerate that insufferable man in your establishment. You knew. My dear woman, I've known since your first visit. Your grandmother showed me your photograph every week during her final year. This is Audrey, she'd say. She'll understand when she's ready. My throat tightened at the image of my grandmother, dying but still planning my future. I'm ready now. Excellent. The partners' dinner is Thursday, I believe. Your husband has requested the Churchill room. He has good taste in rooms he can't afford. Marcus chuckled. Indeed. Shall we discuss arrangements? I assume you'll want Philippe present. The photographer? The very same. He's captured every significant Meridian moment for the past decade. Very discreet, but his images have a way of circulating among the membership. We spent 20 minutes crafting the details. The seating arrangement that would place Clark at what he thought was the head of the table but would actually become a stage for his humiliation. The timing that would ensure maximum visibility. The specific moment when Marcus would make his announcement, after appetizers but before the main course, when alcohol had loosened inhibitions but hadn't yet clouded judgment. After ending the call, I looked at Janet, who'd been listening with undisguised glee. I need clothes. You need armor, she corrected, grabbing her keys. And I know exactly where to get it. The drive to Nordstrom felt like crossing between two worlds. Janet pulled into the valet area, ignoring my protest about the expense, and led me through doors I'd only walked past before. The private shopping suite occupied the top floor, accessible only by special elevator, a space Clark didn't know existed because he'd never thought to look beyond the regular departments. I pulled out the black American Express card linked to V. Monroe Holdings, the one Clark had never seen because he'd never asked about my wallet's contents. The saleswoman's eyes widened slightly at the card's weight and design. Metal, not plastic, with no preset spending limit. How may I assist you today? She asked, her entire demeanor shifting to accommodate serious money. I need something that says power, Janet announced before I could speak. Something that makes every man in a room stand up when she walks in. What followed was a transformation that cost more than Clark claimed we had in our savings. A black Saint Laurent dress that seemed simple until you noticed the perfect cut, the way it suggested rather than revealed. Louboutin heels that added 3 inches and changed my entire posture. Diamond earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, retrieved from the safety deposit box Clark didn't know existed. Standing before the 3-way mirror, I saw someone else entirely. Not plain Audrey who organized pantries and accepted insults. This was someone who owned buildings, who controlled destinies, who could destroy a man with a single word. This was who my grandmother had always known I could become. Janet dropped me at our apartment building after our shopping expedition, the Nordstrom bags hidden in her trunk until I could retrieve them later without Clark noticing. The doorman, Mr. Peterson, gave me his usual nod, unaware that I'd already drafted the paperwork to double his salary once I took ownership of the building next month. Tuesday arrived with Clark leaving early for what he called strategic planning sessions, but I now knew were extended breakfasts with Charlotte Blackstone. I waited until his Uber turned the corner before walking 6 blocks to the office building Clark had never noticed, the one with V. Monroe Holdings listed discreetly on the directory between a dental practice and an accounting firm. My real office occupied half of the 14th floor, a space my grandmother had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city she'd conquered in silence. Clark believed I spent my Tuesdays at the community college taking spreadsheet courses, a fiction he'd created and I'd never corrected. The irony of him explaining Excel functions to me while I managed multimillion-dollar property portfolios never stopped being darkly amusing. I settled at my desk and pulled up Meridian's membership database on my computer, The master files that contained far more than just names and addresses. Every incident report, every complaint, every whispered scandal that Marcus had documented over 20 years appeared in these digital files. My grandmother's insistence on thorough record-keeping now serving as ammunition. Morrison's file came first. Inherited membership from his father in 1998. The transfer process despite 3 separate violations for what the reports delicately termed inappropriate conduct with female staff. 2 settlements paid quietly. 1 server who'd transferred to our Phoenix property after Morrison cornered her in the wine cellar. Clark idolized this man, called him a titan of industry. I made notes about Thursday's seating arrangement, ensuring Morrison would have the perfect view of his protégé's downfall. Blackstone's record proved even more interesting. His wife Charlotte, the elegant blonde who lunched with my husband every Tuesday, had spent 2 years campaigning for membership. The file contained 17 letters, each more desperate than the last, offering increasingly large donations and promising referrals of other wealthy applicants. She'd finally received approval only after her father-in-law, a federal judge, threatened to investigate our liquor license. The weakness in her desperation would serve me well on Thursday. Reeves had attempted to buy his way in with a $50,000 donation before anyone explained that Meridian didn't accept bribes, only qualifications. His file included a note from Marcus, money but no class. Approved only due to father-in-law's pharmaceutical holdings. Watch for inappropriate behavior. Thursday would be his last dinner at my club. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. You need to see this. Coming to your office. She arrived 20 minutes later, her face flushed with the excitement of discovery. Without speaking, she handed me her phone, Charlotte Blackstone's Instagram account already open on the screen. The evidence spread before me like a roadmap of betrayal. 12 photos over 6 months, all geotagged at Meridian, all featuring Clark despite Charlotte's careful attempts to keep him partially out of frame. But I recognized my husband's watch, his hands, the way he held his wine glass with 3 fingers instead of 2. Power lunch with brilliant minds, read the caption from 3 weeks ago. Clark's sleeve visible at the edge of the frame. Discussing futures with someone special, from last month. His reflection caught in her sunglasses. Some conversations change everything, posted yesterday. His monogrammed cufflinks that I'd given him for our anniversary clearly visible as he reached across the table. Janet screenshot each photo methodically while I sat back in my grandmother's leather chair, understanding finally washing over me. This wasn't about my appearance. Clark hadn't rejected me for being plain. He'd already chosen my replacement, someone whose husband traveled internationally 3 weeks of every month, someone whose desperation for status matched his own. She's been hunting him, Janet said quietly. Look at the progression. The photos get bolder. The captions more intimate. She's marking territory. Let her mark all she wants. After Thursday, neither of them will be welcome in any establishment I own. Wednesday passed in careful preparation. I confirmed details with Marcus, arranged for Philippe to have unrestricted access for photography, and reviewed the presentation Clark had left on our dining table. His proposal for the Korean executives was good but not great, lacking the property holdings and international connections that would seal the deal. Information I possessed but he'd never thought to ask about. Thursday morning dawned gray and humid, the kind of weather that made Clark irritable about his hair. I woke at my usual time, prepared his breakfast with mechanical precision, and listened to him complain about the humidity's effect on his appearance while eating the eggs I'd made exactly how he liked them. He spent 2 hours preparing for the dinner, trying on 3 different ties before settling on the Hermes I'd seen him wear to every important meeting for the past year. I sat on our bed with a paperback romance novel, the kind with a shirtless man on the cover that Clark found embarrassing, and watched him practice his presentation in the mirror. The key, he said to his reflection, is making them feel exclusive, like they're joining something rarefied. I turned a page loudly. He glanced at my book with undisguised disdain. You should try reading something substantial, he said. The Financial Times, perhaps. Though I suppose it might be difficult for you to follow. You're probably right, I agreed, returning to my book about a secretary who inherits a fortune and destroys everyone who'd dismissed her. Clark didn't appreciate irony. He left at 7:30, spending 5 minutes adjusting his appearance in the hallway mirror while explaining that these dinners ran late and I shouldn't wait up. The conversation would be about international markets and complex negotiations, things that would bore me. He suggested I order Thai food from the place I liked, maybe watch one of those reality shows that required no intellectual investment. The door closed behind him without a goodbye kiss, a tradition he'd abandoned so long ago I'd forgotten what his lips felt like. 20 minutes later, I stood in our bathroom beginning the ritual my grandmother had taught me during those final months when she could barely stand but still insisted on attending board meetings. This wasn't about beauty. Clark was right that I was plain. This was about presence, about transforming into someone who commanded attention through power rather than prettiness. The Saint Laurent dress slipped on like liquid shadow, transforming my body into something architectural. The Louboutins changed my posture, forcing my spine straight and my shoulders back. The diamond earrings caught the light like captured stars, the same earrings my grandmother had worn to every meeting where men tried to buy her out, push her out or force her out. Janet arrived to help with my hair, sweeping it into the same chignon my grandmother had worn for 40 years of battles in boardrooms. She handed me the leather portfolio containing the ownership documents, the proof of what Clark had never bothered to discover. The car waited outside, James behind the wheel of the Bentley that Clark didn't know existed. When he saw me walking toward the car, his eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Audrey," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You look just like her when she was about to destroy someone." James pulled the Bentley onto Meridian's private drive with the smooth precision of someone who had performed this maneuver countless times, though never with me in the back seat. Through the tinted windows, I watched the building's facade come into view. Limestone and glass rising into the night sky, lit from below with subtle gold lighting that made the entire structure appear to glow from within. This was my building, though I'd only ever entered through the service entrance on the few occasions when I'd needed to sign documents Marcus couldn't bring to my office. 8:45 exactly, Mrs. Hartwell, James announced, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Shall I pull to the main entrance?" "Yes. Let them see the car." The Bentley glided to a stop beneath the portico where Thomas, the head valet who'd been working these doors for 15 years, stood ready. The moment he saw the license plate, VMH001, my grandmother's personal designation, his entire posture changed. His usual efficient movements became almost reverential as he reached for my door handle. "Miss Monroe," he breathed, then caught himself. "Mrs. Hartwell. Welcome to Meridian." The name correction hung in the air between us, heavy with significance. Every staff member knew the Monroe name, knew the stories of my grandmother's monthly inspections, her exacting standards, her ability to recognize every employee by name despite running an empire. They'd been waiting 3 years to see if I would ever claim my inheritance publicly. I stepped out of the Bentley, the click of my heels on the portico's marble announcing my arrival like a drum roll. Through the glass doors, I could see the lobby staff trying to maintain their professional composure while simultaneously attempting to get a better view of the woman they'd only known through signatures on paychecks and glimpses of legal documents. Robert Chin, the head concierge who'd started as a bellhop under my grandmother's management, approached with measured steps that couldn't quite hide his urgency. His usual pristine composure showed cracks, a slight tremor in his hands, eyes bright with something between excitement and vindication. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying 40 years of hospitality experience. "Everything has been arranged according to your specifications. The Churchill room is prepared, the staff has been briefed, and Mr. Blackwood is awaiting your arrival in the observatory lounge." "And my husband?" Robert's expression shifted minutely, professional discretion warring with personal opinion. "Mr. Hartwell arrived 30 minutes ago with the partners from his firm. He's currently entertaining the Korean delegation." The pause before entertaining told me everything. I could picture Clark holding court, 3 drinks deep into his performance, playing the role of power broker in my establishment while the actual power stood in the lobby in designer heels. "Charlotte Blackstone?" I asked. "Seated to Mr. Hartwell's immediate right. Her proximity has been noted by several of the other partners' wives." Of course it had. Charlotte's desperate social climbing was as subtle as a neon sign, and the wives of Meridian had spent decades perfecting the art of cataloging inappropriate behavior for future ammunition. I walked through the lobby, my heels creating a rhythm against the marble that seemed to draw every eye in the space. The night manager, Sarah, actually curtsied, an involuntary dip that she immediately tried to convert into reaching for something on her desk. Two servers carrying champagne trays stopped mid-stride to watch me pass. The entire atmosphere shifted, as if the building itself recognized its true owner had finally arrived. The observatory lounge occupied a mezzanine level that overlooked the main dining rooms through specially treated glass. You could see out, but no one could see in. Marcus Blackwood stood near the windows, his silver hair catching the soft lighting as he observed the Churchill room below. "Punctual as always," he said without turning. "Your grandmother would be pleased." I joined him at the window, looking down at the scene unfolding in my private dining room. The Churchill room was Meridian's crown jewel, circular with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, a baccarat chandelier that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and a table that could seat 20 but tonight held only 12. Clark sat at what he believed was the head of the table, his back to the door in a position that would have made my grandmother laugh. "Never sit with your back to the entrance," she taught me. "That's how you miss seeing your enemies arrive." He was gesturing expansively with his champagne flute, his face flushed with alcohol and self-importance. The Korean executives, Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, and Ms. Lee, according to my files, maintained expressions of polite interest that didn't quite mask their boredom. They'd heard this pitch before, or versions of it, from dozens of American firms trying to break into Asian markets without understanding the culture. Morrison sat to Clark's left, his face already red from wine, occasionally interjecting comments that Clark would then expand upon as if they were his own ideas. Blackstone hunched over his phone, typing with the focused intensity of someone managing a crisis, probably related to his wife's increasingly obvious attraction to my husband. Charlotte Blackstone had positioned herself as close to Clark as social propriety allowed, her chair angled toward him, her body language screaming availability to anyone with eyes. Every few seconds she touched his arm, his shoulder, the back of his chair, each contact lasting a beat too long to be casual. Her wedding ring, an ostentatious display of diamonds that her husband had bought to compensate for his absences, caught the light with every gesture. Reeves sat at the far end, excluded from the main conversation but laughing too loudly at every joke, desperate to be included in a circle that would never fully accept him. His wife, a nervous woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, clutched her purse in her lap and said nothing. "Your husband is on his fourth glass of champagne," Marcus observed clinically. "His presentation skills tend to deteriorate after 3. Let him drink." Loose tongues reveal true thoughts. Marcus pulled out his iPad, swiping through screens with practiced efficiency. The photographer is positioned in the southeast corner. He has clear angles of the entire table. The staff has been instructed to serve the appetizer course at 9, main course at 9:45. Your entrance has been scheduled for 9:15, after appetizers but before the conversation turns fully to business. He showed me another screen. Membership records for everyone at the table, their violations, their payments, their secrets, all catalogued in my grandmother's meticulous system. "Reeves has 2 violations this month alone," Marcus noted, both involving inappropriate comments to female staff. "His membership is already under review. After tonight it won't matter." Below us, Clark stood, raising his champagne glass for what appeared to be a toast. Even through the soundproof glass I could see his mouth forming words, his free hand gesturing to encompass the room, the moment, his imagined triumph. "He's toasting to the future," Marcus translated, reading lips with the skill of someone who'd spent decades in hospitality. "To partnerships that transcend borders. To success that lesser men can only dream of." Lesser men. The phrase burned in my chest, fuel for what was about to come. "Ms. Lee speaks fluent English," Marcus continued, though she's been politely pretending otherwise to avoid Clark's attempts at conversation. "Mr. Kim and Mr. Park have already decided to pass on the proposal. Their translator informed me they're only staying out of courtesy." Clark sat down to applause from his colleagues, basking in their approval while Charlotte whispered something in his ear that made him smile. The kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in 2 years. Marcus closed his iPad and turned to face me fully. "Your grandmother once told me that revenge is best served not cold, but at exactly the right temperature. Too soon and it lacks impact. Too late and it loses meaning. And tonight is perfectly calibrated." At exactly 9:10, Clark stood again, champagne glass raised for another toast. Through the glass, I watched him perform for his audience, unaware that his real audience stood one floor above, watching him the way a cat watches a mouse that doesn't yet know it's trapped. Marcus checked his watch. 5 minutes, Mrs. Hartwell. I nodded once, and he turned toward the dining room doors to begin the final act of Clark's public life as he knew it. Marcus moved away from my side with the measured steps of someone approaching a lit fuse, knowing the explosion was inevitable but maintaining professional composure nonetheless. I watched from my position just outside the dining room doors as he navigated between the seated guests with practiced precision, approaching Morrison's chair with the gravity of a court bailiff delivering a verdict. The whisper he delivered into Morrison's ear was brief, perhaps 5 seconds, but Morrison's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His face drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint. Then he shot to his feet with such force that his chair tipped backward, crashing against the credenza with a sound that made everyone jump. His wine glass, forgotten in his hand, tilted dangerously before he set it down with shaking fingers. Blackstone, seeing his managing partner's reaction, stood without knowing why, a lifetime of hierarchical conditioning making him mirror his superior's actions. Then Reeves, desperate never to be excluded, scrambled to his feet so quickly he knocked his knee against the table, rattling the crystal. The other partners followed in a wave, each standing because the man next to him had stood, none understanding yet what had prompted this sudden display of respect. Only Clark remained seated, his face wearing the confused half-smile of someone who'd missed the punchline of a joke. He looked from Morrison to Blackstone to the standing executives, his mouth opening to ask what was happening, when Morrison reached down and physically grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength for a man who spent his days behind a desk. "What's going on?" Clark's voice carried that irritated edge he used when things weren't proceeding according to his script. Marcus's voice filled the Churchill room with the kind of clarity that comes from decades of commanding attention in spaces designed for power. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Audrey Hartwell, owner and chairman of V. Monroe Holdings, proprietor of Meridian." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Even the servers, trained to be invisible, froze mid-motion. The only sound was Charlotte Blackstone's sharp intake of breath, a gasp that seemed to go on forever. I pushed open the doors and entered my domain. Each click of my heels against the Italian marble counted down the seconds of Clark's old life. I didn't hurry. This moment, this walk, this revelation had been building for 4 years, and I would savor every second of it. The Saint Laurent dress moved with me like liquid shadow, the diamonds at my ears catching the light from the baccarat chandelier above, throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. Clark's face began its transformation in real time, a masterclass in psychological collapse that I watched with the detached fascination of a scientist observing an experiment. First came confusion, his eyebrows drawing together as he tried to process why everyone was standing for his plain wife, the one he'd told to stay in her lane just days ago. Then recognition, his eyes widening as they took in the dress, the shoes, the jewelry, all of it worth more than he'd claimed we had in our savings. Finally, the horror, that dawning, crushing realization as his brain finally connected Marcus's words with the woman walking toward him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. He looked like a fish pulled from water, gasping for something that was no longer available to him. His hand reached for his champagne glass, missed, knocked it over. The golden liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a prophecy. Charlotte Blackstone's reaction was almost as satisfying. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat in a gesture that would have seemed theatrical if it weren't so genuine. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a mask against pale skin. She took a half step backward, then another, trying to put distance between herself and the catastrophe she'd helped create. Marcus pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one Clark had been occupying with such authority moments before. I sat down with the deliberate grace my grandmother had drilled into me during those long afternoons in her study, when she'd made me practice sitting and standing until my muscles ached. The chair received me like a throne accepting its rightful occupant. Clark stood frozen until Morrison, operating on some primitive understanding of hierarchy, pushed him toward a side chair, the one usually reserved for junior associates or plus ones who didn't merit proper placement. My husband, the senior partner who'd spent the evening boasting about his connections and influence, sat down heavily in his designated spot at the periphery of power. Morrison's mouth moved, trying to form words, apologies, explanations, anything to fill the terrible silence. Mrs. Hartwell, we had no idea. Clark never mentioned we would have. I raised my hand, a simple gesture that stopped him mid-stammered sentence. The power in that moment, the ability to silence a room full of men who considered themselves masters of the universe, was intoxicating. I turned instead to the Korean executives, who were watching with barely concealed fascination. Ms. Lee had dropped her pretense of not speaking English, her eyes sharp with interest. Mr. Kim and Mr. Park exchanged glances that suggested this was far more entertaining than whatever proposal they'd come to hear. Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, Ms. Lee, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd hidden beneath years of artificial submission. I apologize for the confusion. Shall we discuss the real business proposition? I believe my husband's presentation, while enthusiastic, lacks certain essential details about our property holdings in Seoul, our partnership with the Tanaka Group in Tokyo, and the development rights we hold in Singapore. Mr. Kim's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all evening. You have holdings in Seoul? 3 commercial properties in Gangnam, 2 in Myeongdong. All purchased through V. Monroe Holdings over the past 18 months. I pulled out my phone, swiping to the property portfolio I'd memorized. Our occupancy rate is 97%, with waiting lists for all premium spaces. Clark made a sound, not quite a word, more like air escaping from a punctured tire. I continued without acknowledging him. Marcus appeared at my shoulder with the iPad, the membership database already open. I took it with a nod of thanks, making a show of scrolling through names while the table watched in silent horror. Let's see, I said, my tone conversational, as if reviewing a grocery list rather than determining social fates. Morrison, current standing, 3 violations for inappropriate conduct with staff. Approved for continued membership despite these infractions. Interesting. Morrison's red face turned purple. Those were misunderstandings. I'm sure they were. I continued scrolling. Blackstone, membership approved after a 2-year waiting period. Your wife Charlotte was quite persistent. 17 letters if I recall correctly. Such determination. Charlotte made a small whimpering sound, shrinking into her chair as if she could disappear through sheer will. Reeves, I continued, attempted to donate $50,000 to expedite membership. When informed we don't accept bribes, your father-in-law threatened to review our license agreements. Creative approach to networking. Reeves's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual nervous laughter completely absent. I set down the iPad and looked directly at Clark for the first time since entering. His face had gone gray, the kind of color that suggested either imminent cardiac event or complete psychological collapse. Clark Hartwell, I said, letting his name hang in the air like an accusation. Current membership status. Under review. Under review? His voice cracked on the words. Marcus stepped forward slightly. We have standards at Meridian, Mr. Hartwell. Members who embarrass their spouses, who describe them as too plain for polite company, who suggest they should stay in their lane. Well, such behavior indicates a character deficit incompatible with our values. Clark's chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on glass as he shot to his feet. His face flushed with a combination of alcohol and desperation. His hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to make his knuckles white, and when he spoke, his voice carried the forced authority of someone trying to regain control of an uncontrollable situation. Audrey, we need to discuss this privately. Now. I continued scrolling through the membership database on the iPad, not bothering to look up at him. The dismissal was deliberate, calculated to demonstrate the shift in power dynamics to everyone watching. You wanted me to stay in my lane, darling, I said, my voice carrying the same casual cruelty he'd used when delivering those words. This is my lane. It just happens to include every building you've spent 3 years trying to impress people in. Clark turned to Morrison, then Blackstone, his hands gesturing frantically as he tried to salvage something from the wreckage. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I had no idea Audrey had any connection to Meridian. She never mentioned. So you're incompetent? Morrison's voice cut through Clark's stammering. You lived with the owner of the most exclusive club in the city for 4 years and never knew? Clark's face reddened further. She deceived me. She lied about who she was. Or, I said, finally looking up from the iPad, you never asked. You assumed I was exactly what you wanted me to be. Someone inferior who made you feel superior. Someone too plain for your sophisticated world. Charlotte Blackstone chose that moment to attempt her escape. She rose from her chair with practiced grace, pressing a hand to her forehead in a gesture of distress that might have been convincing if her eyes weren't darting toward the exit like a trapped animal. I'm feeling faint, she announced to no one in particular. The heat, perhaps. I should. Charlotte, I called out, my voice sweet as honey laced with arsenic. Leaving so soon? But you haven't told everyone about your Tuesday lunches with my husband. She froze mid-step, her designer heel hovering above the floor. Those Instagram posts were so enlightening. Power lunch with brilliant minds. Discussing futures with someone special. Some conversations change everything. All tagged at Meridian, all during Clark's supposed client emergencies. I pulled out my phone, the screenshots Janet had taken already loaded. 12 photos over 6 months. Your husband David is still in Tokyo, isn't he? He returns tomorrow, I believe. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear about these business discussions. The sound Charlotte made wasn't quite a word, more like air being squeezed from a balloon. Her husband, sitting 3 seats away, had gone rigid, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and rage in the span of seconds. Blackstone's eyes moved between his wife and Clark with the dawning comprehension of a man who'd been too focused on his phone to notice his marriage dissolving in front of him. Charlotte. Blackstone's voice was dangerously quiet. Tuesday lunches? It's not. We were discussing. Clark was helping with. Her explanations tangled and died as she realized there was no innocent explanation for 12 documented meetings her husband knew nothing about. Mr. Kim, who had been watching this drama unfold with the detached interest of someone enjoying dinner theater, cleared his throat delicately. He turned to face me directly, offering a slight bow of acknowledgement. Mrs. Hartwell, he said in perfect English, abandoning any pretense of needing translation. Your property holdings in Seoul, they interest us far more than your husband's proposals. Perhaps we could discuss exclusive use of Meridian for our American operations. I replied in fluent Korean, watching Clark's jaw drop. Of course. Our company is already deeply involved in the Korean market. Mr. Park and Ms. Lee exchanged impressed glances. Ms. Lee pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up what looked like financial projections. You speak Korean, Clark said, the words coming out strangled. 3 years of lessons while you thought I was at the community college, I replied, switching back to English. Tuesday and Thursday mornings. You never asked what classes I was taking. I turned my attention fully to the Korean executives, conducting the rest of the negotiation in their language while Clark sat in stunned silence, unable to follow a conversation that was determining his professional future. Within 3 minutes, we'd outlined the framework for a $40 million exclusive partnership that would give their company permanent space at Meridian and first rights to 3 of my commercial properties in Seoul. Morrison tried to interject something about the existing proposal from Hartwell and Associates, but Mr. Kim dismissed him with a polite but firm gesture. We prefer to work with partners who value transparency, Mr. Kim said, looking pointedly at Clark, and who understand that respect in personal relationships reflects on professional capabilities. The deal that Clark had spent 6 months pursuing, the one that would have secured his promotion to managing partner, evaporated in less time than it took to serve dessert. I stood, smoothing my dress with deliberate calm, and looked down at my husband one last time. Marcus, I said, and the general manager stepped forward immediately. Please process Mr. Hartwell's membership termination tonight. Effective immediately. No. Clark's protest came out as almost a shout. You can't do this. I pay $40,000 a year for that membership. Paid, I corrected. Past tense. Your final statement will be prorated through today. This is vindictive. This is business, I interrupted. The same kind of business you've been conducting while telling me I was too plain to understand it. Marcus pulled out his phone, typing quickly. Security will meet you at the locker room if you have any personal items to collect, Mr. Hartwell. Your access has been revoked as of, he checked his screen, 9:47 p.m. The partners who had spent the evening celebrating Clark's success were now physically backing away from him, their bodies angling toward the door as if his failure might be contagious. Morrison had actually taken 3 steps backward. Blackstone was still staring at his wife with undisguised fury. Reeves had somehow managed to edge himself almost entirely out of the room. Philippe, the photographer who had been documenting Meridian events for a decade, moved through the chaos with practiced invisibility, his camera capturing every moment. Clark's devastation as he realized his world had collapsed. Morrison's desperate attempt to distance himself from his protégé. Charlotte's tears as her husband gathered his coat and left without a word. The Korean executives shaking my hand with genuine respect. And through it all, I stood at the head of the table in my grandmother's diamonds, no longer plain, no longer hidden, no longer willing to stay in any lane but my own. Gentlemen, I said to the room at large, though most were already fleeing, I believe dinner has concluded. The Churchill room emptied within minutes, executives fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, leaving behind half-eaten meals and abandoned dignity. I remained at the head of the table, watching the exodus with the detached calm of someone who had already won the war. Marcus stood beside me, hands clasped behind his back, witnessing the aftermath of what would become Meridian legend. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Howard Nathanson, the attorney my grandmother had trusted with her empire, watching Clark sign divorce papers with a hand that trembled slightly. He looked smaller somehow, sitting across from me in a suit that hung looser than it had a week ago, his face carrying the hollow look of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on before our wedding lay between us, the document he'd presented with such pride, explaining how it would protect his future earnings from a spouse who might try to take advantage. He'd never asked if I had assets to protect. The irony wasn't lost on either of us now as he signed away any claim to my $80 million inheritance. The apartment contents are specified here, Howard said, sliding another page forward. Mr. Hartwell retains his clothing, personal electronics, and the furniture he brought into the marriage. Clark's jaw tightened at the word retains, as if keeping his own belongings was some kind of concession I was granting. He signed without reading, past the point of fighting for anything. I have an offer, he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. A small firm in Boston. They don't care about what happened. Good, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want him destroyed completely, just removed from my life and properly humbled. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Did you ever love me? I loved who I thought you were. You loved who you thought I should be. Neither of us loved who we actually were. He left without another word. The last time I saw Clark Hartwell, he was loading boxes into a U-Haul while our neighbors pretended not to watch, the story of his public humiliation having spread through every social circle that mattered. Mrs. Patterson from 4B actually brought out lemonade for the other residents who had gathered to witness his departure, turning his moving day into an impromptu block party. That afternoon, Janet insisted on taking me to lunch at Meridian to celebrate. Walking through those doors as myself, not pretending to be anything other than the owner, felt like breathing freely for the first time in years. The staff didn't quite know how to act. Some bowed, others applauded. Thomas the valet actually wiped tears from his eyes when he saw me. We sat in the main dining room, not the Churchill room with its recent memories, and Marcus personally selected a bottle of champagne from the cellar. Dom Perignon 1996, he announced with ceremony, presenting it like a sacrament. That's a $3,000 bottle, I protested. It was your grandmother's favorite, he replied. She could never afford it during her secretary years, but she bought a case the day she closed on Meridian. She said someday her granddaughter would drink it in celebration. Janet raised her glass once Marcus had poured, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I have a confession, she said. I've known about your inheritance all along. The champagne glass paused halfway to my lips. What? Grandma Vivian told me in the hospital those last weeks when you were at work and I'd sit with her during the day. She made me promise to watch over you but never tell you about the money. Audrey needs to learn this lesson herself, she said. Being underestimated is only a weapon if you learn how to wield it. I thought about all those moments when Janet had bitten her tongue, watching Clark diminish me, knowing I could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. That must have been torture. The hardest thing I've ever done. But she was right. You had to discover your own power in your own time. We toasted my grandmother's memory with champagne she dreamed of drinking when men called her sweetheart, and asked her to fetch coffee while stealing her ideas. Over the following months, I reshaped my life on my own terms. I kept our small apartment but bought the entire building, not for profit but for purpose. The Vivian Monroe Foundation's first project converted it into affordable housing for women leaving bad marriages, women who needed what I'd had, time to discover their own worth. I still shopped at Target when the mood struck, still clipped coupons from the Sunday paper because my grandmother taught me that wealth without wisdom breeds poverty. The habits of frugality she'd instilled weren't about need anymore but about remembering where power truly comes from, not from money but from understanding value. When I walked into Meridian now, everyone stood. Not from fear or obligation but from genuine respect. I'd earned my place through revelation rather than inheritance. At business forums where I spoke about property development and women's economic independence, young women took notes while their bosses tried to pretend they hadn't dismissed me as Clark's plain wife at dozens of events. Morrison approached me at one such forum, his face carrying the permanent flush of embarrassment it had worn since that night in the Churchill room. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want to apologize again for—" "Stop," I said. "You've apologized 17 times by my count. Either mean it and change or stop saying it." He nodded and scurried away, but I noticed later that he'd promoted 2 female associates that week. Charlotte Blackstone disappeared from the social scene entirely after her husband filed for divorce. The last anyone heard, she was working at a boutique in Connecticut, selling handbags to women who didn't know her history. Her replacement at various charity committees took careful notes whenever I spoke, having learned the value of paying attention to quiet women. On the first anniversary of my revelation at Meridian, I finally opened the envelope my grandmother's lawyer had given me with strict instructions to wait until I understood. The paper inside was thin, her handwriting shaky but determined. "My dearest Audrey," it began, "being plain is not about faces or fashion. It's about letting others reveal themselves while you build your empire in silence. They never see us coming because they never truly see us at all. Men like your Clark. And yes, I knew what he was the moment you introduced him. They mistake visibility for value. Use their blindness. Build your power. Then stand in your truth and watch them kneel." At the bottom, in writing so shaky I could barely read it, "Piss, that Clark is an ass. Destroy him beautifully." I had the letter professionally framed and hung it above my desk in the V. Monroe Holdings office, where every visiting executive could read it. More than one had stood before it, color draining from their face as they wondered who in their life they might have underestimated. The frame shop owner, a woman in her 60s named Dorothy, had read it while mounting it and said quietly, "Your grandmother sounds like someone who understood the long game." She understood that being underestimated was just another form of armor, I replied. Dorothy smiled. "The best kind. The one they never see until it's too late." Now, a year later, I stand in that same office, looking out at the city my grandmother conquered in silence and I now rule openly. Being plain was never about beauty. It was about being invisible enough to see everything while revealing nothing until the perfect moment. Clark had been right about one thing: I was too plain for his world. But his world was small, built on appearances and approval. My world, my grandmother's world, was built on patience, power, and the perfect moment to reveal that the plainest faces often hide the sharpest minds. If this story of calculated revenge left you absolutely speechless, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Audrey walked into the Churchill room and everyone stood for the plain wife Clark had dismissed. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.